So Karen Horney, that's how you say that, will be the last of the psychodynamic theorists that we'll look at. So she is psychodynamic, neo-Freudian. She was trained in Freudian psychoanalysis, and it's basically reflected in all of her work. She defended Freud against critics like Jung and Adler, but she disagreed with Freud on some things too. So she disagreed with this idea of the Oedipal complex. So she has interesting things to say about this idea of penis envy. And she disagrees with Freud over the divisions of the mind, the id, ego, and superego. She's not on board with that. She did think that Freud's theories were good for their time, but that they didn't reflect the needs of the people in the United States during the Great Depression. Think about the Great Depression. She said people weren't worried about sexual problems. They were worried about working, food, money, supporting a family. But she said individualistic cultures have a unique problem, these Western cultures, where they're going to have more neuroses, as they put it. As Karen Horney is going to say, everybody in an individualistic culture thinks that they are special, that they can achieve anything that they put their mind to, which is going to cause all kinds of problems. So where Freud was a biological determinist who also focused on this parent-child relationship, particularly in the first 5 years of life, Karen Horney is going to believe in the importance of the environment and social circumstances. Karen Horney was born Karen Danielson in Germany back in 1885. Her father was a sea captain and her mother was from a very prominent Dutch-German family. Her mother was the captain's second wife. He had 4 children from a previous marriage and 2 from the second marriage. So Karen Horney was the youngest. She had 1 older brother. While Karen's mother was mostly supportive and independent, her father believed that women were the source of all evil in the world and that women were inferior to men. She ends up having some pretty mixed feelings about her father. Because on one hand, he would bring her exotic gifts from around the world, he would take her on sea voyages, but he would also get angry with her and with her mom, and he would physically throw a Bible at his wife whenever she upset him. Her dad also put her down for being unintelligent and unattractive. He opposed her becoming a physician. He didn't see the point, but her mother did support her through this, though. And she hit some pretty tough times. So in a very short time span, she got married, she lost her mother to a stroke, she had her first 3 daughters, and underwent psychoanalysis. Karen ended up being in a pretty unhappy marriage, and she had her first affair back in 1911. Within 2 years of their marriage, she and her husband Oscar agreed to have an open marriage. They could have as many affairs as they want, but no concealment or deceit about it. They did want to keep up appearances of a healthy marriage to the rest of the world for the sake of their daughters. Karen Horney was considered a promiscuous woman. She was, by her own account, addicted to men. She had a lot of affairs with younger men, colleagues, married and unmarried people, students, even perhaps women. She would later describe her sexual interactions as being more of a compulsion but not being time-consuming. So this behavior may have fueled her drive for psychological insight. So Karen felt unloved as a child, and you would think, well, as a result, that she would take her 3 daughters and make sure that she, gave them all the love that she felt that she didn't have. But that's actually not what she did. She kept pretty hands-off emotionally with her own children. In fact, in one event, one of her daughters tipped her chair back too far during a Christmas dinner, and she almost fell as the chair was tipping back, so her daughter reached forward and grabbed the tablecloth to try to balance herself and ended up taking the entire dinner down with her as she fell. Oscar, her husband, beat his daughter with a dog whip, and the other 2 daughters cried, but Karen just sat there and looked on, completely emotionless. And their problems with their marriage began around 1923 when Karen's brother died. After Horney's brother died of pneumonia at age 40, the Horney family went on vacation, and Karen took a swim out and was later found clinging to a piling and contemplating committing suicide. So she had a lot of bouts with depression and very frequently contemplated ending her life. Making matters worse, Oscar's law firm goes bankrupt, and he had a near fatal attack of meningitis. He ended up having to borrow heavily to support the family. He became bankrupt, morose, withdrawn, and he became increasingly difficult to live with. As of 1926, Karen basically picks up with her girls and moves out of the house, but didn't file for divorce for another 10 years. She filed for divorce in 1936, and it was finalized 2 years later. She received her training in Berlin, but will end up coming to the United States and practicing psychoanalysis here. She ended up having a working social and intimate relationship with Erich Fromm, who was 15 years younger than her, and has her next romantic relationship with Hans Baumgartner. He proposed marriage, but her response was to get a Cocker Spaniel instead. Her difference with Freudian psychoanalysis was pretty apparent in her work and teaching, and as such, a lot of her students' theses were being rejected because they had to get approved by the Freudian Psychoanalytic Society, but they differed so much from Freud's teachings that they were being rejected. And then Freud had her barred from teaching and training analysts. So she went on to establish the American Institute for Psychoanalysis and developed her own personality theory to better explain what she saw. This emphasis on culture rather than biology. In terms of what causes neuroses, which I emphasize is a psychoanalytic, psychodynamic term, it's causing these problems in your life. She said social experiences, not biology. She said that parent-child relationship was the most important. Horney was a lot like Adler, who thought that we had basic feelings of inferiority as babies because of our small stature. We have two basic needs: need for satisfaction, biological, so need for food, water, sleep, that sort of thing, and a need for safety, so security and freedom from fear. So safety is more important in personality development, according to Horney. Horney believed that if your need for safety is satisfied, then you'd be able to get through almost any trauma and thus be a healthy person. If your need for safety is not satisfied, often because of parental indifference, then you'll have to deal with the basic evil, which is any behavior of a parent that undermines the child's feelings of security. So it could be like somebody being cold or indifferent, rejecting or humiliating the child, breaking promises, or simply having to deal with the parent's own neuroses. This is what would cause somebody to be neurotic. And here you go with the number one thing that you'll probably need to know about Karen Horney, is what causes basic hostility and basic anxiety. This is what you're going to need to make sure you know. So that parental indifference, that not having your basic safety needs met for whatever reason, causes a child to feel hostile towards the parents. But the problem is that you don't feel comfortable feeling hostile toward your parents because you're dependent on them. They're supposed to be taking care of you. And you can't change the situation, you're powerless. Remember, Horney agreed with Adler in that inferiority bit. So as a result, the child will have to repress their feelings of hostility because of fear or helplessness or even guilt. And this feelings of hostility will generalize to the whole rest of the world, not just to the parent it's targeted at. And the child will believe that everyone and everything is dangerous. And this leads to basic anxiety, this feeling lonely and helpless in a hostile world. So make sure you know this slide, that parental indifference causes basic hostility, this anger towards the parent, you're not okay with it, which will cause anxiety where you believe the whole world is not a safe place. Basic anxiety, when it forms, is going to cause somebody to adjust to it. You can do that in a normal way or a neurotic way. So it's going to cause these neurotic trends or needs, but again, apparently normal in everybody according to Karen Horney. It's just that one at the exclusion of others, too much of something would cause a problem or neuroses. A neurotic person has needs that are out of proportion with reality or disproportionate in intensity or indiscriminate in application. So a neurotic person is going to try to solve like one problem, focus on one specific need at the exclusion of everything else, which is going to cause unsatisfaction in other areas and a greater amount of anxiety as a result. So the first neurotic trend is the need for affection and approval, where your own personal center of gravity is in the hands of others because you need to be loved and approved of by everybody. The second one is a need for a partner to run your life for you. So you're afraid of being alone or deserted. You overvalue love. Third is that you live your life in narrow limits. So you're very conservative. You want to avoid defeat so you attempt very little. You almost see modesty as like the utmost value. Then power, where somebody with a need for power would glorify strength and despise weakness. You dread uncontrollable situations and you like exerting power over people. You think that's more important than anything else. And then lastly, the need to exploit others. So you dread being taken advantage of, so you seek to take advantage of other people instead. The sixth neurotic trend or need is the need for recognition and prestige. So you need to be recognized, have all nice things. A need for personal admiration, where you need to be flattered or complimented. You need to be admired for your imagined self. Your self-image is dependent upon living up to the image and or the admiration of others. Then the need for ambition or personal achievement. So you need to be famous, rich, or important, regardless of the cost. You got to be the best at activities. Need for independence and self-sufficiency. So you don't want to be tied down. You need to be independent. You dread needing others. And lastly, a need for perfection and unassailability. Can't be attacked or questioned or defeated. You attempt to be flawless because of hypersensitivity to criticism. You dread making mistakes or finding flaws in oneself. Again, Horney would have said even normal people have all of these needs. It's just out of proportion in people who are neurotic. Although I doubt that her adjustment patterns will show up on the AP exam, it's probably, in terms of her own personality theory, her biggest contribution to psychodynamic theory. We adjust to our circumstances and to our neuroses by doing one of three things: moving towards people, moving against people, or moving away from people. Moving toward people would mean that you need affection and approval. You need a dominant partner. You like to live your life in narrow limits. You're more compliant. So if I give in, I won't be hurt. A person wants to be liked, loved, appreciated, taken care of, thought of as important, approved of, that sort of thing. But the person is still hostile because they have basic anxiety caused by basic hostility. But they go about seeking love and affection. So the person's friendliness is superficial and based on repressed aggression. Moving against people would mean that you have a need for power, or you want to exploit others, you need prestige, personal achievement, basically the opposite of the compliant person. This is called the hostile type. So if I have power, no one else can hurt me. You always look at situations with the thought, what can I get out of it? So these people might act polite and friendly, but it is always a means to an end. And then there's the moving away, or the detached type. So this is the person who is self-sufficient, independent. They seek perfection and unassailability. They seem to be saying, like, if I withdraw, nothing can hurt me. So the aim is to keep an emotional distance from others, this magic circle around yourself that nobody can penetrate. Normal people have to balance these three needs. The neurotic person will focus on one need to the exclusion of all others, which will cause further anxiety and start the vicious cycle all over again. For all three adjustment needs, everyone experiences them pushing and pulling at all times, all at once. The normal person experiences this conflict but is not emotionally charged by it. The normal persona has greater flexibility. They can move from one adjustment mode to another as their needs change. A neurotic person cannot. They get stuck into one pattern. Adler is going to be the first one to take on sort of feminine issues in psychology. And Karen Horney is going to add to that in some interesting ways. So first, she believed in Freud's concept of this Oedipal complex with Carl Jung's Electra complex, that idea that the boy wants to marry his mother and kill his father, and then fears castration, and so will give that up and align themselves with their father and learn what they need to do, learn gender roles after that, and the superego will develop as a result of this. Karen Horney said that Oedipal complex isn't resolved when you're a child, that it ends when you get married. So if you still have an Oedipal complex, you marry your symbolic parent. She suggested that if you want to fix the problem of the Oedipal complex, you should marry somebody that is very different from the parent that you have this conflict with. She went as far as to say that if somebody's possessive over their spouse, that this is a way of symbolically monopolizing their parent. Horney is going to initially accept Freud's idea of penis envy, this idea that anatomy is destiny and women are inferior to men and have contempt over their own lack of penises. But she will revise that. Instead of saying that women have penis envy, she will say that men have womb envy because, and I quote, of the obvious superiority of the female form. She said that womb envy is greater in men than penis envy is in women, because men feel the need to constantly diminish the role of women, not the other way around. Men have to prove their masculinity and women don't. Men feel like they have to perform, and it causes them to want to possess as many women as possible. And ultimately, she said, women don't have penis envy, they have power envy. That it's not the actual physical appendage that they're interested in, but what it provides. She said, with the penis comes the power, thus that is what women are interested in. Some of the comparisons between Freud and Horney would include their early childhood experiences. So Freud says early childhood is really important, and so does Horney. But Freud says you have these fixed stages where you can become fixated, where Horney says it's the relationship with the parents that are most important. Freud says that unconscious motivation is very important, and so does Horney. But Horney focuses on repressed hostility, which leads to basic anxiety that's all unconscious. Freud will focus on those Freudian defense mechanisms, repression being one of them. In terms of biological motivation, Freud emphasized it, Horney de-emphasized it. Freud said that people were always trying to satisfy sexual drives, whereas Horney says that a child just needs to feel they belong. In terms of therapy, Freud discourages self-analysis, where Horney encourages self-analysis. They both use free association, dream analysis, transference. Freud is trying to uncover repressed or traumatic events, and Horney is trying to determine your neurotic adjustment technique. They both believe that anatomy is destiny, but for Horney, only in her early years, not later in her career. And as far as the prognosis for change, with Freud, you'd have a difficult time changing that. Your personality is formed early in life. Karen Horney takes a much more optimistic view about a person's ability to make changes. As for some criticisms of Horney's work, she's accused of having unoriginal ideas. So she used a lot of Freud stuff, dreams, free association. She doesn't have much in terms of empirical support at all. And she generally disregards what it means to be healthy. In terms of her contributions, she does have some novel ideas with basic anxiety and basic hostility. She does a lot of self-analysis, which Freud would not do. And she does act as an early voice in feminine psychology in terms of womb envy over penis envy.